Sentire Media.
This episode is brought to you by the Smart Move Italy app, your free tool for planning, moving, and thriving in Italy. Download it today on iOS and Android. There's a moment that almost everyone reaches when they start thinking seriously about moving to Italy. It's not the dreamy part, by the way. It's not the photos or the language or the idea of slow mornings and better food. It's the moment when one question quietly shows up and changes the tone of everything. And that question is, how much is this actually going to cost, and can I really afford it? Suddenly the dream feels heavy. Tabs open up everywhere, numbers are flying around, and online advice, and of course, ChatGPT answers don't always line up. And a small voice in your head starts wondering, is this unrealistic? Is it irresponsible? Or is it just not for me? Now, if that sounds familiar, this episode is for you, because today we're going to walk through the real cost of moving to Italy. Now, not just the visas and the rent and the paperwork, but the full picture most people never see laid out in one place. In this episode, you are going to learn what a move to Italy actually costs at the beginning, which expenses are one-time versus ongoing, what moving often replaces financially, and why for so many people, the bigger question isn't, can I afford to move, but what is it going to cost me to stay? And this isn't an episode designed to push you toward a decision. It's not about rushing your timeline. And it's definitely not about pretending that it's simple or inexpensive. It's about giving you clarity so you can replace fear with information and guesswork with structure. I'm Samantha Wilson, and this is the first episode of Season 4 of A New Life in Italy. And it's the beginning of a different kind of conversation about moving to Italy, one that looks at money honestly, life realistically, and your future in a way that feels intentional and not overwhelming. So are you ready? Let's get started. I'm Samantha Wilson, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show for people who love Italy and are quietly trying to figure out what it would really take to build a life here. We talk honestly about the practical choices, the emotional shifts, and the parts of this journey that don't always get talked about, so that you can move forward feeling informed, grounded, and more confident. If you're somewhere between dreaming and doing, you are in exactly the right place. Now, let's get into today's show. Before we really get into numbers, I want to tell you why I chose this episode to open Season 4. I chose it because of the moment that we're living in right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, economically, politically, and emotionally. Even people who are doing fine on paper feel very unsettled. The rules keep changing, costs keep rising, and the future feels harder to predict than it used to be. And when things feel unstable, money is always top of mind. It shows up in almost every decision and every conversation, every late night spiral, every panic attack. When someone starts thinking about moving to Italy, about changing their lives in this climate, the first question is almost always about money. Not because they can't afford it, but because when the world feels shaky, people want something solid to stand on. And after years of helping people move to Italy, I've noticed something that is really super consistent. And that's that people don't usually get stuck because they don't want Italy bad enough. Most people do. They get stuck because the numbers feel vague, emotional, and sometimes scattered. Now, you probably see this thing online all the time. There's a lot of YouTube videos about how cheap Italy is. €1 homes, live like a local for nothing, or the opposite extreme, actually. Italy is impossible. It's expensive. Don't even come here. Don't even try. So let's get some clarity about all of that nonsense that you hear, because we're going to talk about what things actually cost for the average person, not for the influencers, not for those extreme shock YouTube videos, but real life. Because costs are costs. They don't change based on your budget. What does change is how you think about them. identifying where it makes sense to save and where cutting corners can actually cost you more in the long run. The bigger problem with most of those videos isn't even the numbers, it's what they leave out. They almost never talk about the cost of not moving. Because when you only look at moving as a list of expenses, it feels enormous, but also somewhat detached. But when you look at it as a reallocation of resources, of time, energy, health, and money, your story will change. And I want to say this right up front because you don't need to make a decision today. You're not committing to a timeline. You're not locking yourself into anything. Today, we are gathering information so that the future you can make a grounded and confident choice when your time is right. So let's start with the one-time moving costs, because these ones you can kind of add up. These are the costs that come with packing up your life and settling it down somewhere new. They're not forever, by the way. They're not monthly. They're simply part of a transition. Housing is usually where people start to feel overwhelmed, so I want to slow this part down just a little bit and make it very practical for you. For this episode, I'm going to focus, though, on rentals because that's the reality for most people. If you're buying property, we covered that full cost of buying in Italy in another episode. But right now, let's talk about what it actually costs to find and secure a rental in Italy. Now, the first thing you need to do, and this is important, is to set your budget early. Don't say, well, it depends, or we'll see what we find. You need to decide how much you can spend in euros, factoring in the exchange rates, and then use that number as your anchor, because almost every other cost is tied directly to the cost of your rent. This includes agency fees, deposits, registration costs, even some utility setup fees. And yes, you will almost certainly use an agency. Renting directly from owners sounds great in theory, but in practice, it's extremely difficult unless, of course, they're your friends or they're your family. Agencies exist for a reason, and for most foreigners, they are a realistic path forward. So the first real cost to budget is, of course, agency commission. This is usually between 10 to 15% of the annual rent or the equivalent of 1 to 2 months' rent. It varies, but that range is something that you should expect and plan for. Next are your rental deposits. We don't do first and last and deposit rents here in Italy. In Italy, deposits are typically between 1 to 3 months' rent, and most of the time it's 3. I mean, it's normal. It's not a red flag. And then you would start paying your rent on your first month of rent, but you will give this deposit in advance. You may also be asked for renter's insurance. Now, we never used to see this so much in the past, but we are starting to see it a lot more often now. So budget around about 350 euros for a year as required. Now, contract registration is usually free if the owner is private and getting a tax break called dry coupon. But if the owner is a company, then the registration cost is split 50-50 between you and the owner. Now, that registration fee is 2% of the annual rent plus a little 16 euro tax stamp, which you will become love or hate, but you'll end up with a pack of these in your wallet. Then there are utilities. You can technically, of course, do this yourself, but if you do not speak Italian, dealing with utility companies can feel kind of like a self-inflicted suffering. It's really difficult. Most people hire somebody to handle it. So expect around, 600, 800 euros to get everything set up properly. Now, furnishings. Furnishings are something that may or may not be part of your rental. Ideally, you want a place that at least have beds or a sofa and, of course, a kitchen. However, if you end up renting an unfurnished, you have to budget a few thousand euros just to get started. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect, by the way. It just needs to be livable. Now, here's a big takeaway for rentals. These are all setup costs. So before you start your search, it's smart to have roughly 7 to 8 months rent set aside to cover everything comfortably. Now, how can you save in this area? Well, you can rent furnished apartments as opposed to unfurnished, especially ones that require you to put a kitchen in. Try negotiating the deposits down to 1 month from 3. Sometimes that works. It doesn't hurt to ask. And be realistic about what you actually need at the beginning. Once your property is secure, you can move forward with your visa. And this is important because even if you're married to a European citizen or an Italian, you still need a place lined up in advance because spouses now require family visas. And for that, you need a place to live, and that place to live needs a suitability certificate. Now, this certificate proves to immigration that the property you're planning to live in is appropriate for you to live in. Now, the cost for a suitability certificate ranges from maybe 500-600 euros to over 1,000 euros. It really depends on the municipality and what documentation the property already has. So while we're talking about visas, let's talk about other normal visas that people get. Visa costs can vary based on how complex your situation is and how much help that you need. Now, if you're a student, you can probably apply on your own, maybe a little quick professional review, but in most cases, student visas can be done on your own. However, if you're applying to be a digital nomad or elective residency visa, unless your application has one source of income or you're an employee with one contract, then things can get a little bit more complex if you have more things going on. You may not need a full service to help. This depends on how comfortable you are, but you will need some kind of guidance. And this is one of those areas that I talked about earlier where trying to save too much up front can cost you significantly later. So again, how much help you need or if you need help depends on the complexity of your specific situation. Now, on the other hand, if you're applying as an investor visa or for the blue card or a work visa, professional help is really not optional. These are very complex processes that require experience and people here in Italy to help you. Now, if you are a family member of a European or an Italian, that's a visa, the little family D long stay visa is something you can probably manage on your own. You don't need to hire somebody to help you. But if you are a family member of a visa holder, like a digital nomad visa or investor visa, or a work visa or a blue card visa, then you will need a family reunification visa. And that requires a clearance. And in Italy, that's called a nulla osta. And this has to be handled in Italy by someone with a power of attorney. So you do not have an option here. The family visa is something you need to hire somebody to help you with. This is the one for the visa holders, and expect about 1,500 euros or more. On top of that, there are consulate application fees, visa fees. These average about $100, $140, depends per person, depends on your visa. You may also need translations and apostilles, so you can budget about $100 per document set on average. Now, another cost many people forget about is travel. Now, you have to apply at the Italian consulate that serves your place of residency. Remember, only in the jurisdiction from which you reside. And that often means flights or hotels or taxis and at least one overnight stay when you go to apply for the visa. So that's not coming to Italy. That's just applying for the visa. And make sure that's part of your overall budget. Now let's talk briefly about shipping. Now, some people think that it's cheaper to bring all of their belongings with them, and some people don't. Some people arrive with 2 suitcases and never look back, and others ship a whole lifetime of memories. Most people fall somewhere in the middle. Now, there's no right choice here, only conscious ones. And sometimes starting fresh in Italy on a new sofa, instead of the one tied to your old life, that can feel surprisingly liberating. So think about it before making a decision. Now, how about your pets? They deserve a little special mention. If you are moving with animals, this can matter a lot. Flights, crates, vet visits, compliance paperwork. This is where I often suggest budgeting conservatively, not because you'll spend all of your money, but because peace of mind has value. If you absolutely cannot bear the idea of your pet traveling in cargo, there are private charter options. They're expensive, yes, often 10, maybe 15,000 euros or $1,000 one way. But for some people, that trade-off is worth it. And don't forget your own travel costs either. Flights, hotels, taxis, and transfers all add up. And then finally, there's the arrival and the bureaucracy. Your permesso di soggiorno fees average around €80 a person. Residency registration at the anagrafe is free, as well as your identity card. Healthcare enrollment starts at €2,000 a person per year, unless, of course, you're Italian, and then it's free. Now, if you want to help navigating bureaucracy and assistance, well, that fee can range anywhere from €500 or €800 for a single permit application to about €1,200 for a full family package. Now, I can't give you a single total cost number because there's just so many variables depending on your situation. So that's why we created this little budget guide. It lets you choose the scenarios that apply to you and build your own realistic numbers. It's totally free, and I've put the link in the show notes here. Now, when you write these numbers down, yes, it can look scary at first, but remember, these are one-time costs. These are not reoccurring. And when all of these numbers live only in your head, they can stack on top of each other and feel a lot bigger than they actually are. When you write them down and separate them, the emotional weight tends to change. Clarity kind of does that. Well, now that we've covered the costs to get you here, it's time to think about the cost offsets, because this is where the energy will start to shift. When you move countries, you don't just add expenses, although I know it probably can feel that way. You actually also remove others. Sometimes it's quietly, and sometimes it's very dramatic. For example, health insurance in Italy is €2,000 per person per year. For some people living in the US, this is a fraction of what they pay per year. We don't have any deductibles, let alone high deductibles, no expensive prescriptions. People in Italy, we don't have multiple cars, or we don't convenience spend, nor do we stress spend. Now, that last one matters more than people realize. Many expenses exist because life feels rushed or disconnected or even exhausting. We have food delivery or impulse purchases, outsourcing everything because you're tired. When daily life requires friction, spending often follows. And time plays a role here too, because less commuting in Italy means more walkable days, means simpler routines, and this could even mean no more gym membership. This isn't about romanticizing slow living, by the way. It's about recognizing that time pressure costs money. And usually where you're living now, there's a lot of time pressure. For many people, this is the moment when this story shifts from, can I afford to move, to this might actually rebalance my life. So let's talk about something a little harder to quantify, and that's the cost of staying where you are, exactly where you are. This isn't about dissatisfaction, by the way. Many people have great lives where they are, even when they're living in unstable times like we are right now. But even good lives have costs, especially when something inside of you is asking for change. Healthcare, mental health care, rising premiums, cost of living increases, housing pressure, and then there's lifestyle costs like stress and burnout and loneliness and feeling disconnected and lack of community. These things all cost, and they're very expensive, maybe not in dollars or euros, but in time and in health, things we can't ever get back. Now, I often ask people to imagine themselves 5 years from now, if nothing changes. You're in the same place, doing the same thing, the same pace, the same pressures. What does life look like for you financially? And what does it feel like emotionally? Because both have value. This isn't meant to scare you, by the way. It's meant to give the future you a voice. One of my favorite parts of that little workbook, that free guide workbook that I was telling you about, was that we have inside of it a quality of life scorecard. Because not everything that matters, of course, can be measured in dollars or euros, like your health and your energy and your community and safety and joy and movement and connection. It asks you to rate your life now and what your life in Italy could be realistically, not a fantasy version, a real grounded one. And then it asks you one simple question. What would it be worth to move even one or two of those numbers? Not all of them, don't fix everything. Just improve what quietly shapes your everyday experience. Quality of life has real value, even when it's hard to calculate. And this is where everything comes together, my friends. You've looked at the cost of moving. You've looked at what those costs might replace. And you've looked at the cost of staying where you are. And you've looked at how life might feel like if you move. This isn't about arriving at a perfect answer. It's about seeing the full picture all at once. Now, if this were an investment in your future self, not just a financial transaction, would you say yes? Can you afford not to move to Italy? You don't need to answer this today, by the way. Sometimes the biggest shift isn't a decision, it's a perspective. Now, before we finish, I want to leave you with this. You are not behind, you are not late, and you are not unrealistic for wanting more from your life. This episode and this workbook, this free guidebook, aren't about rushing you toward a destination. They're about helping you choose a life that fits. And you don't have to make a decision today. You are gathering information. And that alone is a powerful step forward. I'll see you in the next episode of New Life in Italy, but first, our Q&As. It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started. All right, let's get to our famous Q&As. Question number 1, do I need to have all of my numbers and my budget figured out before I start planning seriously? You do not need to have all of your numbers and all of your budget figured out, but you do need to be very honest with yourself and very realistic. And always err on the side of caution, meaning add a little bit more, pad your budget a bit more, give yourself a little bit more leeway in case things end up costing a little bit more, or in case you decide to up your rent just a little bit if you can. So always take the time and think slowly about what it's going to cost you, how you want to live, where you want to live, and do your research, and then put your budget together. It will change. It's a working document. It's kind of like a business plan. Think of it that way. You are going to put your ideas out first and be prepared to pivot and to shift and to change them just a little bit and mold them until they fit perfectly. But you really should have all your numbers together before you really take the step of actually moving or spending any money moving to Italy. Question number 2, is moving to Italy only realistic if you have a lot of money? You know what? People think this. We get this email, or actually comments more, when we do our A New Life in Italy videos with all of the people that we've helped, and not all of them, but a lot of them. And sometimes, you see their lives and you think, oh my goodness, these people are just super rich. That's how they got here. And some people, yes, some people do have a good amount of money and they're more comfortable than others. But you don't need to be rich to move to Italy. Honestly, the cost of living here is a lot lower than probably where you're living, than most places in North America for the cost of living. So you always have to balance what you're spending life now compared to what you'll spend in Italy. And you can live here on a budget. You don't need to spend all the money that you have, or you don't need to be earning a ton of money. You can really live here quite comfortably. Now, where this really comes into play often is people with the elective residency visa. They're like, oh my goodness, why do I have to have 32,000 euros a year to get this visa? Well, when you factor in a couple grand a month in rent and utilities and food and entertainment, that 32,000 doesn't go very far. So you don't need to be rich. You can be comfortable, but you have to have enough money to support yourself here, because often you're here and you cannot work. Question number 3, how do I know when it's the right time to actually make the move to Italy? Oh, this is a hard one. It's sort of more of a personal thing. And, some people make decisions to move to Italy because they are leaving something, they're escaping, maybe not necessarily escaping, but they're leaving something to come to Italy, and sometimes Italy is pulling them in. Like maybe there's family here that's pulling them to Italy, and then sometimes there's something in their home life where they are now which is sort of pushing them out. You have to decide your why. You have to think about why you want to move to Italy, and that usually will evolve into when you should move to Italy. And then you have to start asking your questions like, how would this work? How much is it going to cost? Where will I live? So the basic things that you would think about. If you're just moving to another part of your own country, you're going to ask yourself these same questions. Of course, the move is a lot bigger and it's going to cost you more, but it's still basically the same questions. And when you start asking yourself, how would this work? How can I make this happen? What do I need to do? And not, oh my goodness, what if it fails? What if I'm wrong? What if everything goes wrong? What if it costs too much? When you start changing your questions and you find yourself being more positive and more proactive, that's usually a sign that it's time. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you of something. You don't need all of the answers right now. You just need the right questions and the space to think clearly. If this episode helped you feel more grounded or less alone, that's exactly why the show exists. You can find all of the links and the resources that I mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper, head over to smartmoveitaly.com for more ways that we can help you make your move to Italy a whole lot easier. And if you're enjoying the show, subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone that is also dreaming about Italy helps more than you know. Thanks again for spending time with me. I will see you next week. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show. This episode is brought to you by the Smart Move Italy app, your free tool for planning, moving, and thriving in Italy. Download it today on iOS and Android.